Driving with John is coming through! Hi everybody, welcome back to Driving with John. Today we're going to talk about how a driver, a rig driver like myself, how we manage our clock and what that means exactly. Because our industry is really highly regulated by the government, and literally we have a clock that we have to follow. And I'm going to break that down today and explain to you how that clock works and how we manage our time inside of that clock. The first part of the clock I'm going to talk about is going to be the driving clock. What that means is every day we have 11 hours that we're allowed to drive. We're only allowed to be driving for 11 hours a day. So they give you a little clock and it tells you how many hours you can drive that day. There's a lot of things that go into that clock, but I'm going to break it down piece by piece and then I'll put it all together at the end, so that you can see what I mean. Now that first slide you just saw, that is the drive time. That is how much time you've driven today. Some people call it the drive line, whatever, drive time, okay? Now that cannot go above 11 hours, otherwise you're in violation. Now to the next slide. That slide is what it's called a shift clock. Okay, you're only allowed to work 14 hours. And when I said you can only drive for 11, now the shift clock is including drive time, so you have 11 of that. Any on-duty time, like doing pre-trips, post-yard moves, anything like that is called on-duty time, or when you're leaving a stop that you would have on-duty time. But so that is your 14-hour shift clock. Once that starts, it does not stop. So once you start it, it starts at 1, and then it counts all the way up to 14 hours. At 14 hours, it stops. If you work over that point, you're in violation. So the two separate clocks, one is about driving, and the other is about everything you do within a 14-hour period. They fit together because the 11 hours is part of that 14, but the 11 hours stops as long as you're not driving. The 14 continuously runs throughout the day until you run out of time. So once you start your clock, that clock will continue to run until 14 hours comes, and then you're down. Now this slide is your 70-hour cycle time. In 8 days, you're only allowed to work 70 hours. So 8 days, 70 hours. Okay? And what goes into that 70 hours is anything that you use inside of your 14-hour clock that's driving time, on-duty time, yard moves, anything that's considered work time. Now, if it's personal time or personal conveyance, that doesn't count against that 70. But everything else does, unless you're off-duty, okay? Which I'll go into in a minute. But you have drive time, you have yard time, you have on-duty time. There's a few other, ones that would count as on-duty, but those are the big ones that you use most of the time. So that is part of your 70-hour cycle. Now, after 70 hours or 8 days, those are the two that matter. After 70 hours, if you haven't worked your 8 days, you're gonna have to shut down for 34 hours to reset that clock. If you don't shut down for 34 hours and you've worked 8 days, then you start recycling time. That's why it's called the 70-hour cycle, because you can recycle your time. Whatever you used on day 1 will come back, I can't count, 9, come back on day 9, okay? So whatever you use on day 1 will come back on day 9. That's called recycle or retreaded time, okay? Now these slides, the 000 basically is how much time you have till your next break. Okay, I took that picture when I was on break, so that's why I said 000 on my overnight break. So that's how much time until your next break. You're only allowed to work 8 hours before you need to take at least a 30-minute break. So 8 hours to a 30-minute break. I mean, if you work 6 hours and take a 30-minute break, that's fine too. Okay? So always remember, you can't work more than 8 hours without a 30-minute break. Now those slides are your duty status. Remember how I was saying you were on duty or off duty, or taking a break or not taking a break? That's your duty status. So what that means is you're either off duty, you're on duty. Part of that on duty is also driving, things like that. Yard moves, if you're leaving the location that you're at where you just got loaded or unloaded, things like that. That's all on duty. Off duty is your breaks. You need a half-hour break after 8 hours. After you've worked your 11 hours and your 14-hour shift, whichever one comes up first, once you're done for that day, then you go on a 10-hour break. That 10-hour break is considered off duty. Now, in that duty status, if you noticed, in the middle, there was a thing that called sleeper berth. When you're staying in your truck and you're in the back, you're in sleeper berth. Why that's important is if you ever have a place you need to be to, you can do what they call an 8-2 split. What that means is at the end of the day, you know that you're done for the day, and you only drove, let's say, 5 hours, but you can't get to your shipper or your receiver until the next day, because that's when your appointment is. So you shut down, but you have to be there 9 hours from now. So you shut down for 8 hours in sleeper berth. That allows you to use the rest of the clock that you didn't use the day before to get to the shipper. But then you have to take a 2-hour break so that you have the full 10 hours so that you get your full clock back. Now that's a technique you don't use a lot, but when you need it, it comes in very, very handy. I'll repeat it just because it sounds complicated, but it's really not, okay? If you are close to your shipper, but you don't need to be there till the next day as in 9 hours later, but if I take a 10-hour break, I'm going to be late. You still have the ability to take an 8-2 split. You go in sleeper berth for 8 hours, then you get up, you take that other hour to drive to your shipper, and while you're at your shipper, you try to get in your 2-hour break so it resets your clock. The 2-hour break, you have to be on sleeper berth also, so you have to be in the back, back of the truck, curtain closed. That's kind of the rules, okay? So like I was saying, your duty status all depends on, what you're doing at that moment. And there are little techniques like the 8-2 split that you can use to help you. But if you don't understand how all of that works together, it can really harm you, okay? Don't be too worried about getting your clock exact, like the exact how every little technique works. Just get the basics down and you'll learn the techniques as you go, okay? So to rehash real quick, okay, you have your drive time, which is 11 hours, okay? Then you have your shift time, which is 14 hours. Part of that 11 hours goes into the 14 hours. So does any other on-duty time. So you have your drive time, your on-duty time, your yard moves, things like that. That all goes into your 14-hour shift. So does any downtime that you have, any breaks that you take goes into that 14-hour shift also. Because it's a continuously moving clock. It never stops. The 14 hours, once you start it, it moves all the way until it's 14, and then you're done no matter what. You drove 8 hours, and you took a 6-hour break in the middle, that's now 14 hours. You are done. You cannot drive until 10 hours later. Unless you do an 8-2 split, which would mean you go into sleeper berth for 8 hours. Then you can start your day again, use up the rest of your drive time from the day before, because you're going to have 3 hours left, and then go into a 2-hour sleeper berth to regain the rest of your clock back. Okay? Like I said, it sounds complicated. It's really not near as complicated as it sounds. But that technique, the 8-2 split, when you're first starting off, you don't really worry about that. You just make sure you don't go into violation, you don't drive more than 11 hours, you don't work over a 14-hour shift, you don't go over a 70-hour cycle without recycling time. As long as you know those 3 things, the rest will come with time. Okay? And one last thing, the thing that I had the most trouble with, your clock is set up every day so that it restarts every day. Okay? And when I say day, I'm not talking about a 24-hour day. Okay? Yes, it's possible that you work 24 hours because you have a 14-hour shift and a 10-hour shift together is 24 hours. But in reality, let's say you drive 10 hours and then you take a 10-hour break. That's 20 hours. So the next day you'll be starting 4 hours earlier. Okay? Why that's important is I don't know exactly how every company works, but the companies that I have worked for, it always resets. Your clock always gets time back, or like if you're recycling time, always comes back at 12:01 in the morning, depending on where your depot is. You know, Eastern time, Central time, Mountain time, Pacific time, wherever your depot is. Okay. So one last time, I'll break it down for you again. You have your drive time, 11 hours. You have your shift time, 14 hours. And then you have your cycle time, which is 70 hours. The 70 hours, that clock stops and goes. It only moves when you're on duty or driving or doing a work task. Okay? Otherwise, you're in off duty and the 70 hours is not moving. But the 14 is a continuously running clock. It runs all the time. Whether you're on duty, off duty, no matter what you're doing, even in sleeper berth, it just continues moving until it's 14. Okay? Like I said, it sounds complicated, but it's really not. Just make sure you don't drive over 11 hours. Make sure you don't work over 14 hours. Make sure you get a half-hour break after 8 hours. And make sure you get a 10-hour break after you're done driving for the day, under 11 hours. As long as you do those things, you won't be in violation. Okay? Don't worry about all the other little stuff. You'll figure that out as you go. But just get used to watching your clock. The only other thing I would give you advice on when it comes to manage your clock as a truck driver is make sure that your times are exact. Like your pre-trips, it depends, it changes from company to company, but I'm going to use me for an example. Your pre-trips are 5 minutes long. If it's 6 minutes, you're going to have to edit your clock and make that back to 5 minutes. It's only 1 minute, but that minute really matters. You'll see why. It builds up over time. If you do your post-trip, that's 10 minutes long. Let's say you accidentally go 15 minutes. So you have to edit that time to make it 10 minutes. So now you've saved 6 minutes today because you edited it twice. Let's say you stop and get fuel, which is considered on-duty time. It's a work task. And it takes you, 12 minutes to get fuel. I know I said gas, it's diesel. Sorry. Old things die hard. You stop to get fuel, and when you're getting fuel, it takes you, 12 minutes to get fuel, let's say. Okay? Well, that only supposed to take 5 minutes. So edit your clock, make it 5-minute fuel time. Now that's going to free up 7 more minutes. So in that day, you're saving a ton of time by making sure that you're exact on your times. Over a week's time, that could be hours saved. An hour saved is an hour of driving time, which means it's an hour of you making money. That's why it's important that you manage your clock correctly, because it's all about making money. You only make money when you're moving. You keep your driver's door closed and you keep on moving, and that's how you make money. So I appreciate everybody watching, and I hope this was information, that helps another trucker out. And if you're not in trucking, you can understand that, our clock is basically our lifeline. It's how we make our money, and we have to be very careful and very stingy with our time. So, thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, make sure you go over there and subscribe. Make sure you go down there and like. Scroll to the bottom, leave me a comment. I'd really appreciate that. And you'll see me on the road on the next video. See y'all.